Good morning. Welcome to the podcast. Today we're going to discuss a difficult subject because nobody seems to be interested in discussing it until recently, and that is the current starvation of Gaza. Now, to put this into some kind of context and to give people an idea, Calgary has a population of 1.3 million people and occupies about 319 square miles. 825 square kilometers. So people who live in Canada can have some idea about the size of the Gaza Strip. It's 2.2 million people in 141 square miles or 360 square kilometers. So Gaza has approximately 1 million more people in an area that's half the size of Calgary. Since October, and these statistics are important when we're looking at what's going on there, they have dropped uh, since October 2024. Israel has bombed 40,000 locations in an area half the size of Calgary with a million more people. In the last 3 months, they've not let any food in whatsoever. Now, everybody should understand that Gaza is not an agricultural country. They have no food. They're being starved. So what's the world doing about it? Well, Britain, Canada, France, they're just saying, what you're doing is wrong. Quit doing it. Nobody is talking about serious sanctions.
Yeah, that's a
So what
big
do you think?
issue. I mean, without people stepping up, it's war crimes as far as I can see. The world just talking about taking action is not action in and of itself.
And it just gets more and more ridiculous. They've got millions of infectious diseases. They've got 72,000 hepatitis cases. They've
Wow.
destroyed religious and humanitarian infrastructure, 828 mosques, 167 partially damaged, three churches targeted, 19 out of 60 cemetery sites have been damaged or destroyed. And the weapons that they are using are supposedly smart bombs and drones, which means that you can assume at least that the targets are intentional. So it's very difficult when you look at they've targeted 66 aid facilities, 29 soup kitchens, and 37 aid centers, and blocked more than 37,400 humanitarian and fuel trucks in the last 2 months. Now they've promised to let some food in, and they're talking 2 or 3 truckloads for 2 million people. So it's about time Canada stepped up and started to say something. And if
Well,
we
there's
put
all
this into
sorts of reports of in the last few days of increased bombing and targeting power structures. And I've seen an article that said they were even surrounding hospitals in the Gaza, preventing people from going in or out of hospitals. That's not acceptable behavior by any means in a modern world. They, like you said, they have the technology backing them and they're specifically targeting civilians. To me, I find it not a coincidence that since Trump said he wanted to build his resort luxury lifestyle in Gaza for the rich and the famous around the world, all of a sudden there's a blockade of all food going to Gaza. There's indiscriminate bombing, shooting, killing. It's like there's some sort of deal between Trump and Netanyahu and Israelis to do everything they possibly can to make sure that the Gaza Strip is now totally dominated and being prepped for land developers to come in. And Israelis have said, we're going to take over the Gaza Strip, meaning that because they do not honor any of our international war tribunal rulings or anything, they are going to take over the Gaza Strip, and there must be a deal between Trump and investors to come in and rebuild it for the liking of Israelis and the wealthy. And this indiscriminate getting rid of the population is unacceptable, and it's staging for a business development in the Gaza that is only to the benefit of Trump and his desire to have his Trump towers and beach resorts and golf courses there. I can see no other reason for that, and the Senate in the U.S. should be ashamed of themselves, because this has been going on for 12 years of rule by Trump controlling the Senate to allow this and other conflicts in the world to continue. And there's a list of them: Iran, Ukraine, and Gaza is one of the most current ones, and we're getting very limited information on what truly is going on there, as you're enlightening a lot of people, including myself, as to what's happening there. The audience should be aware that censorship is at play in Gaza, where there's been a lot of media journalists killed accidentally in Gaza, preventing a narrative from coming out. I'm sure you can enlighten us more there, Cal.
Well, here's an example. They've dropped in this recent go around 100,000 tons of bombs, which
Wow.
is which in 19 months, which is translated to 100 kilotons. And in Hiroshima, the nuclear bomb was 15 kilotons. So the Israelis have dropped the equivalent of 7 Hiroshima nuclear weapons on a strip of land which is half the size of Calgary, with another million in population.
Wow.
And the thing is, it's absolutely inexcusable. Canada, as an example, jumped on the bandwagon with sanctions against South Africa because of the alleged native homelands, saying that that was apartheid. Yet in Canada, we have native homelands. We call them reserves. Oh, sorry, First Nations. And yet we put sanctions on a country for a fraction of what's happening. And it's because our politicians are afraid. They're afraid that they'll be labeled as anti-Semitic if they're pro-people, and that has to change.
Yeah, I agree. It's totally unacceptable for Canada not to be the leader in peacekeeping roles in the world. We're a multicultural country that try to get along with everybody. We have representatives from every country in the world here living, getting along, showing that Canada is a strong and vibrant country, and it's a leadership role that Canada should have on the world stage, and not stepping in and saying, we can position ourselves between Israel and Gaza is ridiculous. Canada can put a lot of pressure on Israel and help Gaza reform its country so that it is a better state at the end of all this conflict. But the problem is that since Israel was formed, it's been at war with Gaza, which was given to Egypt at the end of World War II. And there's been 6 major wars where there's been lots of death, and then it was controlled by Egypt. So Gaza was always a pawn in an apparent religious war in the region. The Israelis took it over in 1967 in the Six-Day War, and that they gave back the Gaza Strip to the Palestinians to develop it as they seen fit. And we've had ongoing wars and conflict. Like you said, they were shooting rockets into Israel. Well, the sophistication of the rockets are nowhere near the sophistication that Israelis have. It's just not even comparable. It's like throwing a rock at a machine gun nest. It's not going to be a good outcome.
Let's look at the propaganda. When Israelis cross into Gaza, run a farmer off his land, do so with the military support, and build housing units, it's called a settlement. Where the Palestinians have lived for the last 70 years are called refugee camps. So the linguistics that we use show that the Israelis are settling, the Palestinians are just visiting. There's no permanent word there. It's if you look at Israeli captives in Israel, they're called hostages. If you look at the 10,000 Palestinians that are held captive in Israel, they're called detainees. They're not called prisoners because prisoners have rights. Even the linguistics of our propaganda tilts the board, and people
I
have to
agree.
smarten up. They have to smarten up, and they have to say this has to stop. And the only way to stop it is to put some serious sanctions in place and get our world courts operating efficiently so that we can deal with these people. Like they need to know that there's repercussions for genocide.
I think that, France and Great Britain and Canada have been going in the news and saying you have to act responsible and quit the genocide. Well, I think at the same token, the resolution to the Gaza Strip means that France, Britain, and Canada need to step in and say, look, we're gonna put peacekeeping troops in Gaza between the Israelis and the Palestinians, and we're going to keep them there and maintain them there because we cannot allow genocide to go on or breaking of the laws, international law, any longer. And the only solution is to have a strong mandate for peacekeeping to go in there. Bosnia and Serbia war, it took peacekeepers going in there and staying a long time to get that under control. I think it's important that as a world leader, Canada steps up and says, look, we used to be the peacekeepers. We want to take that role back. Most Canadians will acknowledge that we really enjoyed being peacekeepers in the world and trying to impose our values of working together to have a better country and neighborhood and community. We can bring that to the world, and that's what we should be doing. That's my opinion. Canada needs to step up, man up, and once and for all, put peacekeeping troops in the Middle East, which I do not believe we ever have. That's important.
In Beirut, I mean, they'll strike the UN peacekeepers just like anybody else. That isn't going to work. And one of the problems has been that Western countries have said if we demand a two-state solution, if we impose sanctions on Israel, then we will interfere with the peace negotiations. That was the sales job that they did on Western people, saying, oh, yeah, we can't interfere here because there's something in the background that's going to solve the problem. And if we put sanctions in place, it's going to mess up the peace talks. There's no peace talks. The thing is, just look at the sanctions that they're imposing on Russia, what the British and the French and the Germans and the Polish are saying about how horrible it is that you have a country invading another country, how horrible it is that they're shooting it up. Nothing, crickets, for Israel. The other day,
Sanctions alone won't solve the problem over in Israel. They've sided with the U.S., and we know that the U.S. is untrustworthy. The U.S. is about monetary gain for its leader. They've already stepped up and said, we're interested in the monetary gain. So the rest of the free world has to say, look, especially Canada, we have to step up and say, sanctions work. We need to sanction Israelis. I mean, Canada is still trading and selling to Israel. That's unacceptable. That should have stopped a long time ago. And the only other solution is actually putting our peacekeepers in harm's way to back our sanctions and say, look, we're willing to help make change, but effective change that will be a lasting change in the region. And that is what Canada can do by sending in peacekeepers. Yes, we don't have the U.S. on side. Yes, it would piss Trump off that he doesn't get his golf resorts and beachfront resorts, but that's the price we pay as a leader in the world. And Canada can be that leader, and UK and France as well. So maybe it's time we reevaluate our allegiances and time to step out of our cocoon and say this is time for Canada, France, and Great Britain to take back the roles of sanity in the world and try to help out.
It's not going to happen.
Probably not. We need strong leadership. We need strong people backing the leadership. And we need to out these countries once and for all that they cannot have alliances with each other to continue breaking international law, because the world is too small nowadays that what one country does affects every other country in the world, and we need to put a stop to it.
Let me give you just one more small example. Cuba. The Americans have imposed sanctions, worldwide sanctions on Cuba since the mid 60s, 1960s. Cuba didn't invade anybody. Cuba didn't bomb anybody. And yet the Americans and the Israelis are the only two countries in the world that still vote to maintain sanctions on Cuba. Because the Americans have a veto, the rest of the world can't lift those sanctions. And in Cuba
That has
right
to
now,
stop. There's no country, we've shown, the world has been shown that there's no country that should have veto power anywhere in the world. Russia should not, China should not, US should not. So this ideology that small countries cannot oppose large countries has stopped. And that's basically looking at what Ukraine has done. Russia said, kneel under or we're taking you over. It didn't work. Small countries do have a say now. It is, something that we have to consider, that we revoke all veto powers on the UN and take a step in the right direction, saying we as world citizens need to stop allowing criminal states. And we can say that the US is a criminal state. They got a convicted felon running their country. We know that Russia is a criminal state with a war criminal running their country, and China has dubious leadership as well. Although China now is taking the role of what the U.S. used to do on the international stage, but we need to, as people in the world, start pushing the UN to say there's no such thing as veto power. What one country does affects the whole world.
The Americans just withdraw from whatever they don't like, anyways. So
Well,
the
it's
UN,
time they
the
quit
UN,
imposing their will, and we have let them impose their will. Canada gave up being peacekeepers by lies under the U.S. government that Iraq was building nuclear weapons, and the U.S. talked Canada into, and Britain and France enjoying in a war to stop a nuclear proliferation in Iraq, and we find out there was no nukes. It was all bullshit and lies. We ruined our reputation worldwide as a result of it, and we may never get that peacekeeping reputation back of neutrality. We know now that the U.S. was very good at covering up some of its lies over the years, but now with Trump in power, we know exactly what the U.S. has stood for decades and centuries, and nothing's going to change unless the world stands up and says it's time for change. We don't want World War III.
not going to
We're on
happen.
the precipice
But,
of it.
but let me give you a domestic example. Canada has a budget deficit, and apparently our deficit has been running higher than most other G7 countries in relation to the size of the economy. And here we are promising to buy more weapons. If you think about it, who's Canada going to fight? Like what's the point?
Fighting is the U.S., which is a monetary fight.
Yeah. So why are we taking money away from healthcare? Why are we taking money away from schools and the support, of the elderly, and even building more housing? Like why are we even talking about?
Because the bully to the south wants us to protect the north so they don't have to spend money protecting themselves in Alaska. They want
Well, they're
Canada to
talking.
protect Alaska, and it's like there's a perfect example of why you don't do what Canada's doing. Look at Costa Rica. Costa Rica gave up its army, gave up its military spending. They have free education, free health care, and they're like the Switzerland of North and South America. It's a beautiful country. The people are great people there. The economy is doing really well for a small country. And guess what? They don't really spend anything on weapons, and it's peaceful.
Well,
That's
they
what
haven't had a.
Canada should be emulating.
Well, they haven't had a military coup. But if you look at Trump's golden dome that he's going to build, so he's going to build a missile shield for the U.S. Going back to the original DO line concept, what would happen is they would shoot down the incoming missiles, but they have to land someplace.
Right on
And,
Canada.
yeah,
Shortest
and
distance between Russia, China, and U.S. is right over Canada.
so what are we going to do about it, right? Like it's like why are we thinking of spending billions on jet fighters? Like, what are we going to be using jet fighters for? You can't put out forest fires. You can't rescue sailors at sea. You can't help people when there's floods or hurricanes or tornadoes.
Well, as
There's
a
all.
peacekeeper role, it would help in international conflicts, but it's more important to have drones, men on the ground, women on the ground, interacting with people, so there's a human factor versus drones and stealth technology. And jets are only good up to a point, and Ukraine has proven that jets are a waste of money. They can be shot down. They do give your troops an advantage in an excursion where you can drop aerial bombs, but for most intents and purposes, unmanned drones are probably the way of the future anyway. So,
So what is Canada going to do with its percentage of GDP spent on military? Like what are we going to do with that? Are we going to have more people in the army? Like what are we going to do with these people? Are we going to have to send them someplace to do something? So
well, we could redo the peacekeeping role internationally, because we have so many people that from all over the world that speak many languages in our armed forces. We have a very unique ability that other countries may not have, and that's multi-language volunteers, multi-linguistic people in our army, and they all get along. So it makes us easier to fit into countries, and we're well liked. We're not a more mongering society like U.S., where they have 60 to 80,000 people killed on the streets by guns, not even including the number of killed by police officers. That's a war state's been going on for centuries now. We're not that culture. We don't have gun violence in the streets unless the guns are across our border from the U.S. illegally. We value peace more than any other country in North America, and that since there's only really 2 or 3 of us in North America. I'm taking a poke at the U.S. obviously.
But let's look at this practically. Why don't we build more made in Canada water bombers to fight forest fires? Forget about the F-35s. They're great at air shows and that sort of thing, but you know that really wears thin pretty quickly, and they're an awful lot of money.
Well, that's
Whereas,
the U.S. pressuring us into doing something that we would not normally do. We don't even need the F-18s we have. Give them to Ukraine. What are we going to do? Send out F-18s to intercept Russian MiGs coming at us? Like, come on, it ain't happening. So reality is, you're correct. We don't need to be spending that. There's better places to spend that money.
yes, thing is, when people are using hunger and starvation as a weapon, what is our investment in our military going to do to make any difference to that? Absolutely nothing.
No.
And so we're better off shipping over, grain and food to
We
places
do
like
that
Gaza.
too already. We ship a lot of humanitarian grain and food to troubled spots in the world, but I think we should step that up. You don't really need to send the food except at the onslaught of a crisis. What we need to send is our agricultural expertise so they can grow their own food in a peaceful environment. When you have ongoing wars, you can't build gardens and farms. They're just going to be blown up and bulldozed under, because that's a method of terrorization, is to make it a starving economy. And that's what's going on in Gaza. They're trying to use starvation as a weapon of war. That's unacceptable. Totally
So
unacceptable.
practically speaking, everybody should be emailing their MP and their MLA and their MPP, anybody else that they can think of, and telling them,
Everybody in the world should be sending letters to the Prime Minister of England, the leader of France, to all these countries that have the ability to step up their game in international affairs. Canada as well. Send, whether you're a Canadian citizen or not, citizens of the world need to start endorsing and giving the power of their vote or authorization that you represent my values. If Britain and France got 3-4 billion signatures and saying, hey, we back you, that's a significant impact in the world. And that might be the stepping stone to authorize them with more power at the UN, because we're all citizens of the world. If a nuclear bomb goes off in Ukraine, it affects everybody in the world. So we as a world citizens have to start standing up and saying, we have a say, and start contacting the countries that are in the best position to counter US, Russia, China, and say, united, we stand. United, you are not the powerhouse in the world. That's my take on it.
Going back to today's news, the EU sent a delegation to the West Bank, which is, not Gaza. France, Ireland, and Germany, according to the Israeli Defense Forces, they accredited diplomatic delegation deviated from the approved route, so they shot at them.
Yeah, that's
So
ridiculous. That was
they're shooting at diplomats, right? Now, apparently, the French say it's unacceptable. The Ireland says it's completely unacceptable. The German Foreign Ministry has called the Israeli government to clarify what had happened. Now, you know what happened? They shot at them, right?
Yeah,
and they did so intentionally. They admitted they did so
exactly.
intentionally. Now, where's the sanctions for that?
Yeah,
You
they need to be punished, and as long as the U.S. is siding with them, I think maybe we should be sanctioning the U.S. for their transgressions on the international stage too. But we need to do that cautiously. We need to do that slowly, and we need to isolate ourselves from these type of actions on a world stage. The Israelis, backed by U.S., are going to commit crimes, atrocious crimes in Gaza. They have no reason not to stop breaking war or doing war crimes. And in my opinion, they're going to bulldoze Gaza right to the ground. Trump's going to come in with a deal to rebuild it for his own gain and profit. He is a real estate mogul, and he sees and said he wants that land. And Israelis are kissing the ring, and they're doing everything now, starvation, disease, everything to make it so uninhabitable that nobody in their right mind would want to stay there. That needs to stop. There's no ifs, ands, and buts. We need to stop that. And I think the only logical way is putting peacekeepers on the ground in Gaza and saying, to hell with you, Israelis, and to hell with you, U.S. We're here on behalf of the humanitarian cause, and you guys be damned. And if there is a God, he's probably already damned them.
in any event, I think we have to be absolutely suspicious of the propaganda that we're being fed. And it's unfortunate that people don't have the cognitive ability to separate the fake news. It's not, I mean, propaganda isn't new. I mean, the First World War was full of propaganda.
Yeah.
It and the thing is, like I said earlier, even the linguistics, an Israeli that steals a Palestinian's land is called a settler. And yet the land he stole from a person who lives in a refugee camp, and they've lived there for 3 generations now. That linguistic difference alone just goes to show you how tainted our news is.
Well, that's where
They
we probably do another podcast on why we need to have journalism and protect journalism. When you go to public and you blatantly lie or deceive, that is a crime. It's not something that we should accept in society. So when we're getting, like in the Gaza Strip, we're getting unreliable journalism that is based on propaganda and lies, the majority of people might not be able to use critical thinking to distinguish it. You and I see some of the articles differently from different perspectives because we read other articles in support of or not in support of those statements. So where do we draw the line? What is truth? And that's the line that's been blurred because we will not prosecute people for fraud or misrepresentation of statements. We will not indict people for perjury, and it's happening all over the world. I mean, look at Trump. There's your classic example what happens when everything out of your mouth is 99% lies and you can't distinguish a lie from reality. And that is killing the world and freedom in the world. Democracy was based on truth and justice. We have none of that anymore in the world. So without that, we have to figure out as the free world, and I'm not calling the U.S. free anymore, the free world, Europe, Canada, Japan, other places have to step up and say, what do we need to do to get back truth and justice in the world? And that is going to be the UN's biggest task
they're not
over the
they're not
next
going to be able to
decade.
do it. But let's look at very very recent example. And well, first of all, you kill off the journalists that oppose you,
Yeah.
so that there is no other side to the news. But the UK's development minister accuses Israel of using hunger as a weapon of war during a visit to the West Bank. And then it comes a day after the foreign minister called Israel's military escalation in Gaza morally unjustifiable. So, what kind of action has the UK taken? They've suspended talks on a trade deal. It's like,
Yeah.
wow, whoa,
Well,
you're not going to talk,
corruption
you're not going
runs
to talk
deep,
about.
and corruption is always following the money. When there's money on the table, you always follow the money because now the world is run by oligarchs and the extreme wealthy, and that's it. And that was one of the things that after World War II we did not want to happen. And lo and behold, since the 1970s, there's been a gradual undermining of democracy by the wealthy, and it all started with Reaganomics. And we can do
But
lots of takes on that.
no, but let's get back to the reality. At one point, the UK had an empire that circled the globe. One of the positive things to that is they installed common law and concepts that go all the way back to the Magna Carta. And here in today's world, they can see, and we're talking high level government officials here. The one is the UK's development minister, Jerry Chapman, and the other one is Foreign Secretary David Lammy. So these are high level, cabinet level individuals who see for themselves there's genocide, starvation,
Oh,
morally unjustifiable. So we'll stop talking about trade. That's the extent of the sanctions. So the Israelis must be just laughing,
Oh,
thinking, what do we get from the UK anyways, right?
yeah,
Bangers and beans, like what's hell? They're going to stop talking about trade. Ooh, they're really starting to scare me now, right?
yeah, yeah, the world is in a bad state of affairs, and hopefully something comes that puts us back on the right track. I'm dumbfounded as to how this Gaza Strip and war crimes are allowed to go on, but then I'm dumbfounded as how a criminal is running the U.S. So says all you need to know about world affairs.
Yeah.
So is there anything
Well,
else
apparently,
on this topic that you want to highlight
well,
for our audience?
well, well, continuing the Israeli army shooting at diplomats, the Turkish Foreign Ministry said the latest uh, incident shows Israel's systematic disregard for international law and human rights. But what has Turkey done, right? The Dutch foreign minister says diplomats should be able to do their work and threatening them is unacceptable. What have they done?
Yeah,
Egypt says the incident violates all diplomatic norms. What have they done?
yeah, I don't
You
know.
know,
And
and
then
they
and
only
then
get ex-
Iran steps in and says, "Hey, we'll try to help them out." Now Iran's a terrorist state, so
yeah.
it's
But
a
here's
it's
here's here's the thing though. These people only get excited when somebody shoots at their diplomats.
right.
Like that's what made the news.
Yeah,
And it's appalling, absolutely appalling.
yeah. Like you and I both know, this is head shaking,
Yeah.
disbelief in such a advanced technological world that we are allowing this to go on. I wish there was a easy solution. I'd love to hear from people on what they feel is a good solution. I personally think Canada can play a stronger role. There's no reason we shouldn't. I think Britain has to step up to the plate and say we are going to try to bring our force to bear on the situation, and France has to step up.
Canada Canada has a permanent prosecutor at the International Court of Justice.
Yeah.
A year and a half ago, I wrote to him and said, "Why haven't you brought charges?"
You
And,
didn't even get a
and
response,
no,
probably.
no,
Yeah, yeah,
nothing.
yeah,
Absolutely,
exactly.
absolutely
Yeah,
nothing.
we don't
I,
want to
I,
hear
I,
from people that are logical, right?
I said, you're a prosecutor. You have the power to draw up the documents, present them to the powers that be, and start the process. Not a word.
Well, he gets paid really good in that position, so follow the money. If he opens his mouth and goes against the people that appointed him there, he's gone so fast his head'll spin. So it's follow the money scenario again. He's a puppet on a string. And that's the problem with a lot of politicians. They're puppets on strings. And the appointees are friends of the politicians on a string, and they're on strings too. So we need to start looking at what is classified as aiding and abetting criminals. And anybody aiding and abetting criminal activities needs to be prosecuted. That isn't happening anywhere, not in Canada, not in the US for sure, or there'd be a lot of people filling jails. And on an international scale in the UN, the same thing applies. There are many countries in Europe that are trying to be very democratic and uphold the laws, setting an example for the world, but the world is not following them for some unknown reason.
Well, let's get back to Britain, France, and Canada signing a joint statement condemning
Whoopee,
Israel's military
whoopee.
action. And no, but they're warning of further concrete actions. So
Yeah,
if
somebody
if
getting
you
concrete boots and being dumped
yeah,
over a ship? No,
no
no
further
concrete action.
what, like come on. it's like saying, and the old joke about, throwing the rabbit in the briar patch. It's a sham, an absolute sham. Even signing a declaration like that and making it news without having any kind of stick behind it, all that does is make Canadians think that, hey, our government is doing something. We're doing something. We're doing something to stop the murder and the starvation and the killing of children, the withholding of medication, the destruction of housing. No, we're threatening further concrete action.
Talk is
You know,
cheap. It takes money to buy whiskey, and it takes action to back up any cheap talk. And
yeah.
Canada, France, and Great Britain are talking a lot of cheap talk. I want to see action. Show me.
Yeah, bring something to the United Nations, even if the Americans veto it like they always do. Stand up and at least say something, right? Let the rest of the
Exactly.
world know that you're actually seeing what's going
Let them
on.
know that if they don't watch it, you might be able to sink your teeth into the matter. But if you're not even going
And
to try to bite it, you're just a joke. Making more rhetoric is not helping the problem. We need solid action, meaningful action, and we need to stand up and start making positive changes. And I think the first change is let's get rid of veto power at the UN. That has to stop. We have enough countries in the world united that France, Great Britain used to have colonial power all around the world. Those countries will still side with those powers, and Canada has a good reputation of being used to be peacekeepers. We need to step up and say that's enough. Enough is enough. The abuse of power stops, and it stops at the UN or dissolve UN because it's a meaningless body without bite. A dog with no bite is just barking and nothing happens.
so to get back to our original topic, let me give you one more stat here. The
I was
Israelis
reading
have
where
dropped.
there's 110 people, 100,010 people injured or more in Gaza, and there's been
Okay,
close to 50,000 deaths. But
that's
I
an
think those
underestimate.
numbers are outdated.
But let me give you another statistic here. The Israelis have dropped more tons of explosives on Gaza than were dropped on Dresden, Hamburg, and London in the entire World War II.
Wow, that's a
70,
lot, a lot.
70% of all buildings have been damaged or destroyed.
And back to this clearing effort for Trump. That's just a clearing effort. There's
And
no
Canada's
reason
going
to bomb those buildings other than unless you're doing a clearing.
Well, Canada's going to take concrete action.
Yeah, we're going to send bulldozers over to help level the half-destroyed buildings so Trump can have his way with these resorts. Yeah, sure. Ain't happening
It's
on my
appalling.
dime. I'll oppose that.
It's appalling. But anyways, hit the like button, give us your comments,
Share,
and
comment,
write your members of parliament, your members of the
subscribe. We
provincial
do need your
legislature.
subscriptions. That's how it's helpful, is subscribing.
Anyways,
Okay, on that note, have a good day.
Goodbye.
We'll try to cover more in the next session. Thank you, Cal, for
Good night.
showing up. Okay, bye.
Subscribe to the channel, give us a like, and please share the video. Don't be afraid to share this commercial with your friends too.